Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome all in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. And we had a great week of basketball. It was really great to see all the teams get into action, see some real games, and be able to talk about and recap all of that. Some big wins for some disappointing results for others, but a lot to get into, and we'll get into some of the recaps, and then also looking forward to this week, what that's going to all look like. Before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button and follow along on social media at Post by Zach at unofficial WCC Pod. So a couple of interviews coming up for this episode. We'll be talking with USF head coach Chris Gerlufsen as they come off a big win against Boise State on Saturday night. So it'll be great to round that out with him and then what they have coming up this week. And then also talking with Liam Hanley, who covers college basketball and has covered St. Mary's extensively. So we'll talk a little bit about where St. Mary's is at this stage as well. Talk a little bit about players to watch as well coming into this week. Games of the week. Did it in this on the Monday episode last week, but I'll delay that for later in the week as all the games I have picked for the games of the week are later on in the week. So that's Washington State, Iowa on Friday. On Saturday, LMU at St. Louis, Santa Clara at Nevada. And then on Sunday, St. Mary's heading out to the Pentagon in South Dakota to take on Nebraska. So those are the four games I'll be previewing later on in the week. But I want to start with USF and their big win, which I think is the most important win of the first week of the non-conference schedule. They picked up an 84-73 victory over the Broncos on Saturday at War Memorial. And this, overall, talking about this is the type of win that they were missing a year ago. This is that resume win. This is that proof that they can actually beat these good teams. Boise State was picked to win the Mountain West last year. They were picked to win the Mountain West this year. They're coming off 3 straight tournament appearances. This is a team that knows how to win. They know how to win on the road. They know how to win in hostile environments. And USF showed out in every sort of way on Saturday. I got to go to that game, and the place was rocking. The students were engaged. USF played with poise. They played with grit. They played with composure. They out-rebounded Boise, which I thought was a critical thing in this game. Again, talked a lot about how USF was going to be the less experienced front court team, and maybe that was a disadvantage on their part, and that was an advantage for Boise. And not that Boise didn't play well, because they did play well in this game. Tyson Denengard still had 25 points in that contest, so you could see that their star still was able to get his, but it was not easy for him. Dweedo Newberry had a really good game, double, 14 points, 10 rebounds. Malik Thomas was the guy in the first half, really getting the Dons going. Marcus Williams came on strong in the second half of this contest, and that was something that they really needed. He started off slow. He was 2 for 8 from the field in the first half, but in that second half, he had 14 of his 20 points in the back half of that game. Tyrone Riley IV is going to be a dude, already contributing in significant ways for USF in the starting lineup, but also looking like a potential freshman of the year candidate. He actually was named freshman of the week by the WCC on Monday morning. And they held Boise State to 40% shooting. The defense was there. The offense showed up. This was a game of runs. And there was one, and I was thinking about this is the sort of game we've seen get away from USF in the past. This is the game we've seen them lose their composure in different ways. And one of those moments was a turning point in the second half. It was USF was up 47-38. This was early in the second half, 16 minutes left. And then Boise State went on a 12-0 run, and they went up 50-47. It was on a Denengard and one. So this was that moment of it was a tipping point. Was this going to get away from USF as Boise State made a run to take the lead, or was USF going to be able to bounce back and put the pressure back on Boise to try to keep up? Because this was kind of, it had been a game of runs, was back and forth, but USF had controlled that for the most part throughout the course of the game. And then after that 12-minute media timeout, USF did get back out and took the advantage and went on a 16-0 run of their own to go up 63-50. So an immediate response, a great time probably for a timeout when it came, because it really did seem like that was almost like, Boise's getting back into this. This is a scenario where, unfortunately, we've seen USF kind of have these games slip away. And on Saturday, it didn't slip away. This was a really good performance for the Dons. They shot 68% in that second half to close that one out. Honestly, like, the game was so tight throughout that once it got to about the 3 minutes left and USF was up by like 15 at one point, it looked like it could actually get away from Boise and this could turn into a laugher, even though that would not have been indicative of what the game had been all night long. But again, this is a huge boost for USF in the first week of the season. This is a game that you're going to circle in March. This is a game you're going to circle as you talk about what they are as a potential NCAA tournament caliber team, a resume team. USF just picked up a win that's going to help them a lot on that front. Now, what that ends up being a Q1 or Q2 is going to depend on obviously how Boise finishes out this year, but this is a good Boise State team. They're going to be in the mix all year long. So I'd imagine at the very least, this is going to stay a Q2 for USF, if not end up being a Q1 based on if they Boise meets the expectations of being the Mountain West champion and whatnot. That might boost them up that high. But big game for Boise. Great win for USF. This is that almost, it could be the stepping stone to look at bigger things of what they have coming up. They have Memphis still on the schedule. They have the Sunrise Slam also coming up later on the non-conference schedule. There's some really good games still on the USF schedule. Now that they've gotten this one, they can start building. They can start really kind of like really make that case that they are going to be they have to stay in the conversation for the NCAA tournament going into conference play when we get to that in January. All right, but enough of me talking about this game. Let's actually get to head coach Chris Gerlufsen, who will talk more about what this game means and then also just what was going on in this game as we saw this game go back and forth all night long. All right, happy to bring on again USF head coach Chris Gerlufsen. A big win on Saturday against Boise State. USF went 2-0 for the week. Also the win over Cal Poly earlier on. But want to really focus on that win on Saturday, 84-73 against a tournament level team that's been to the NCAA tournament 3 straight years, a team that you guys had just narrowly missed beating a year ago. Just talk about like what the locker room was like after picking up a win against a team like Boise.
Yeah, I mean, first off, it was a great night to be here on the hilltop. I want to just give credit to our administration, our marketing team, our student body, our fan. It was just it was an awesome early season basketball environment, and that's part of what kind of makes this place special. We had all off season to kind of think about these type games, and a year ago we were so close to having a lot of these type breakthroughs and just could not get over the hump in a lot of those games. And so not to say that was any extra motivation in the off season, but I think we have a locker room full of guys who just aspire for a lot more for this program and as well as the coaching staff. So to be able to just collectively come together in the second game of the season and perform like that against a really quality team, a team that I'm pretty certain will be an NCAA tournament team and a veteran, well-coached coach club. Just to do that was a really good feeling. I just felt good for our guys in our locker room and really, really proud of them.
Yeah, there were a lot of runs in this game. Like it was kind of like just like a pendulum swing back and forth in this one. And the one that really kind of like was almost kind of like the last one that really kind of made that difference was when Boise State went on that run early in the second half and took the lead. I think it was like 50-47. And that was almost like a lot of times that's a moment where we've seen teams start to pull away, but you guys responded well. What was said in that timeout after before the free throw that really kind of like got you guys going? Because you went on a 16-0 run after that free throw.
Yeah, that was kind of a tenuous part of the game for sure, because I thought we came out of the locker room and got some separation to start the second half, and then they did what good teams do. They battled back and they went on a run of their own. I think went up 3 in that segment, and I had to calm down a little bit in that timeout, and that was the first time I felt like collectively 1 through 5, the guys who were in the game, we just had unbelievable talk in that timeout. Marcus Williams kind of led the charge with that. And as you said, we've been in some of those positions before and maybe not always responded in the right way. And so I think that was a really kind of just key kind of building block for us of understanding that there's still a lot of time left in the game, and it was certainly going to be a game of runs. And for our guys to kind of lock back in and come out and execute the way that we did, and also pile on some stops in that segment as well. That was just a really, really, I thought, key to the game. And as I said, something that we can build on going forward.
One of the things that was maybe one of the toughest parts going into that game was the front line of Boise. Like that is a veteran group, a very talented group up there. And the leadership from looking at way Duito Newberry played in that contest, and just the challenges that he had to face. It was like whether it be Denengard or any number of their front line guys. Talk about just like the way the front court played for you, because that's to me was almost like the one thing that really made the difference in this contest.
Yeah, and I know there's been some questions about whether our front line is deep enough or what that was going to look like with the departure of Mobo, and I've been seeing this out of Duito the whole offseason, and I think he's willing and able to fill a lot of that void from a rebounding production standpoint for sure. But he also scored the ball at a high rate in that one little segment there in the second half, and I thought Carlton Lingard really stepped up and took a step forward. And Boise presents a lot of problems just with their size. They start 3 bigs. Degenhardt is probably more of a 4-man than he is a 3-man. And so they're big across the front line, and they're big when they sub as well. And I thought our guys really just embraced what the game plan was. We did a good job of kind of we got them on the glass, winning the rebounding battle 37-30. And we were willing to live with some stuff too, right? That's a team where you kind of have to pick your poison in terms of what you're willing to give up. And, Degenhardt had a big night, but we kind of cut the water off for the other guys. And that was kind of the key of what we kind of talked about heading into the game. So our guys did a great job in embracing what the game plan was.
Yeah. Now I want to take a step back to look at like the first full week, and one of the guys who has really kind of just kept that progression going has been Malik Thomas. Has been big the first couple games. He really got you guys started off well against Boise State. Talk about like his growth and his progression and what we're starting to see, because we knew like he was one of the more electric players, or can be, in the WCC, but we're starting to see it be on at least two nights in, really on a consistent basis.
Yeah, Malik is, I think it's so good, number one, to see him comfortable and kind of embracing the position and the role that he's in. He's gotten so much better since he's gotten here. And part of that is probably me, learning him too, and how to use him and how to let him kind of be the best version of himself. But he has an unbelievable knack for scoring the basketball. Gets to the free throw line at a really high rate for a perimeter player. can present some problems from the defensive standpoint as well. Just can't say enough about him and the role he's kind of providing for this group. It's been fun to be a part of kind of his development, and I still think there's a lot left to come out, with Malik. But really proud of him, proud of his effort here to start the year.
And he picked up WCC Player of the Week just this morning, so that was actually really kind of cool to see. But then also picked up Freshman of the Week with Tyrone Riley, and he's been really fun to watch these first couple nights. Obviously, the opening night he ends up with 26 and has a big night there. But a couple of really key moments, even against Boise, where he's starting just finding his spots, and he's really finding it within the flow of the game and not pushing too hard. What have you seen from him? And because he really does look like he's also kind of like the perfect fit for what you guys need.
Yeah, similar to probably Ryan Beasley a year ago. He's kind of older beyond his years from just a basketball IQ standpoint. He's really, really smart. Picks up on everything we've done. He's a guy who I don't really have to say things to twice. And in the first two ball games, at key moments in both those games, he just found a way to affect the game, whether that be rebounding the basketball, whether that be making a defensive play, or just kind of finding some key baskets in key times of the games. And as you said, I thought he did a really good job of just kind of staying within the flow of the game on Saturday night against Boise, and just plays the right way. And he's a guy who I think is going to be really exciting to watch as the season moves along. He's extremely talented. And just a really, really good teammate and good kid. I'm really excited for him. I'm excited for our program with him, being only a freshman.
Yeah, between he and Ryan, those two are going to be fun to watch going forward for the next couple years. Looking like deeper onto this team, like there have been a number of newcomers that have come in and have played pretty key roles, at least like in spurts here and there. Like I'm looking at like James O'Donnell and Jason Rivera Torres, like both have come in and played solid minutes in both of these first two contests. Kind of talk about like the depth of this team, because I know like that's something that has been mentioned as far as like how deep is this USF squad, but now it's like we're starting to see more of these pieces they're starting to fit, and it's actually working pretty well in the first week.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not even close to kind of getting to full capacity with our bench guys. Number one, it was nice to get Ryan back into the mix on Saturday, but having a guy like Jason, who I think his minutes will continue to go up here as he gets more comfortable. But he has an ability to come into the game, and he plays so hard. He's so active, has good size. But can really score the basketball. And he's still learning how to kind of fit into what we do. But I see a really high upside with him. And I think his role will continue to grow as the season goes on. And James is a guy who I have a lot of trust in for being a freshman. He's really tough. He's more athletic than probably what he looks, and just has a really good brain for the game. So I think, those two guys, in addition to, Ben Abosi, he did not get into the game on Saturday. But I think he's going to, have a chance to really affect us. And you could go on down our bench. I think we have multiple other guys who are going to continue to, find their way into our rotation.
A great start, like first two games of the season. Getting a win against Boise obviously is a huge like tip in the cap of like the potential resume win for March. Obviously, like as getting those others are going to be important. But this week, looking at like forward to like Long Beach State, Chicago State, these are, while they're not named teams, like these are good programs that you're going to have to come up against this week. As you kind of come off the high of Boise, how do you kind of like refocus for these next two before you really come up against maybe the next big opponent, which is Memphis in about a week and a half?
Yeah, there can be no relax at all. As you said, two really quality teams coming in here this week. And I think this is part of learning how to kind of deal with coming off a big win is you got to get to what's next, and have to be incredibly short-sighted, understand that this is a long season. And the best thing we can do is come out today, Monday, have great practice, have 2 great days of preparation, and just continue getting better. We have so much more we can improve on as a team, and I'm just looking forward to kind of seeing the growth of this team continue. Excited to get back to it on Wednesday night and hopefully build on what we did on Saturday.
All right. Thanks a lot, Coach, for hopping on. Great win on Saturday. It was fun to actually be out there and be able to see it in person and get to experience, because you're right. The building was rocking. That was a great experience with the students there, the band, like just everything was like, it was one of the better experiences in a while up at the Hilltop.
No, likewise. We want to continue that. So appreciate you having me on.
Want to thank Coach Gerlufsen for hopping on. It's great to kind of talk about that team, that win, because this has been one of the more consistent teams in the WCC, as we've known. 20 plus wins, 7 of the last 8 years, and getting a win like that really is kind of changes the math on what we're going to see or look at USF going forward throughout the course of the year. Now that they've proven that they can get one of those wins. But also, like, thinking about the number of guys, we knew the core that was coming back: the Ryan Beasleys, Malik Thomas, Marcus Williams, Dweedo Newberry. We knew like those pieces, but it was how are they going to fill out the rest of this team? We're starting to see some of those guys have immediate returns. Carl Lingard Jr., Tyrone Riley. You're starting to see it from other guys on the roster already. So very good signs for USF, especially only 1 week into the season. But that also got me to thinking about other players to start watching, because there's a number of guys who started to jump out at me that may not be completely on the radar as of yet. And we'll get to, obviously, like, I'm going to talk about Gonzaga a little later and Santa Clara a little later, some of the guys that are going to be there that we have to keep an eye on. But there some other names that really started jumping out that maybe weren't front of mind as guys who might make an immediate impact, are going to be kind of big pieces moving forward. And one of those I wanted to start off with was at Oregon State, and that's Parsa Fala. He has been really good in the first 2 games for Oregon State, and I'll get into Oregon State in general a little bit later, but he's been averaging 14.5 points a game. He's shooting 75% from the field. The transfers from Southern Utah has been really good to this point in the season. And yes, the opponents that Oregon State has had aren't great, Utah Tech and Weber State, but it's still a really good sign to see someone who's coming into a new system and kind of being able to hit the ground running. Honestly, a lot of the Oregon State guys have had the same experience, so that's definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. Like, he's also been averaging 4.5 rebounds, so again, very early. Haven't had a ton of minutes in these ball games, so that's someone I'm starting to look at. And there's a couple St. Mary's guys that also are popping up on that list for me. First of which is Mikey Lewis. Like, this was someone who I thought was going to hit the ground running, and sure enough, he did against Towson. And then also blanking on the second opponent, not Akron, but Chattanooga. Against Chattanooga, he was averaging 12 points off the bench in only 15 minutes, shooting 50% from the field, unafraid of looking for his shot, unafraid of being that sniper that St. Mary's a lot of times needs in that offense. So that was really surprising. Not surprising, but really kind of like it's jumped out at me at kind of meeting the expectations that I thought he might have, but then also being, I think, a little bit better than I thought he would be early on in this season. And then the other one is Paulius Morauskas. He had a lot of hype coming out of Arizona. What happened over in the world, the FIBA championships over the summer. And this is someone who hit the ground running. Also, double-doubles in the first 2 games with St. Mary's. He hasn't been flashy per se, but he has been wildly successful in what he's been able to do. He had 23 in the game against Chattanooga, just eating up boards. And I think that's something that is going to be critical, especially considering these first couple of games. Mitchell Saxon's been in foul trouble, so Morauskas has been able to kind of fill that in and be that guy Between he and Barrett, they've actually been kind of controlling the boards in these first two contests, and Chattanooga and Towson aren't the biggest of teams, so that's part of it. But this is someone who is still finding his way in this system, but has found great ways to contribute to their first two wins. They do play Akron on Tuesday night, and then they do have Nebraska later on in the week as they head out on the road for that one. But early returns from Morauskas, and I want to talk a little bit more about him and where St. Mary's is. So I'm going to bring on Liam Hanley, and he and I will talk about what we see from the Gales 2 games into the season. All right, happy to bring in Liam Hanley, who covers college basketball and has done quite a bit of coverage on St. Mary's. And obviously, like, these first couple games have been pretty exciting. What's been your overall impression of the Gales through obviously just 2 games here?
Yeah, if I had to boil it down to a word, I'd be satisfied with the performance. Not quite happy, satisfied, but encouraged. I think there's definitely some stuff to work on, but I like all the guys that have come in and played significant minutes have contributed and have, shown glimpses of what they could be throughout the season. So I say definitely satisfied. I'd have liked to get, a little bit bigger wins against, Towson and Chattanooga, but those are, we kind of mentioned, 2 very solid teams we could see, winning their conferences this year.
Yeah, and again, like, St. Mary's has set up their schedule pretty well the last couple of years, and kind of in this fashion of having these kind of top tier, mid-major opponents in their smaller conferences. But these are teams that we could see actually do something or even make appearances in March. But through these first 2 games, we've seen some instant success from a couple of the new pieces. Like, the 2 that obviously stick out to me are Paulus Morauskas and then Mikey Lewis. As you've kind of watched them in these first couple games, how have you kind of like seen them gel, and what's been your assessment of those 2 so far?
Yeah, Morauskas has been really solid. He's been a bit of a different player than I expected. I mean, we all probably saw those highlights of him at Arizona and look at his stats like, oh, he's a big 3-point shooter. He's going to shoot 50% from deep. But he's been much more of an interior threat, which I've really liked. I mean, he's been a vacuum on the boards, getting 12 rebounds per game. I mean, it feels like every opponent's miss, he's right there scooping it up. And he's crafty. I mean, he can do a little bit of everything. I mean, in the open floor, we saw him run the fast break once or twice. Looking a little bit like Nikola Jokic out there, kind of the not super athletic, but he's under control. He's always comfortable on the ball, which is really nice to see. And he's scoring. I mean, I was like, oh, last time he had a good game. Then I looked at the stat line. He had 23 points and didn't really feel like that. No, he gets really easy buckets on putbacks, and he gets the free throw line. I think still waiting for a little more of that outside shooting, but he hit a pair of threes, and if he can stretch the floor, that'll be huge for them. And then Mikey Lewis, I think. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, yeah, I think kind of like you mentioned the 23 points, and you had to kind of look it back up to see, like, oh my God, he actually had like that many, because he doesn't do it in the flashiest of ways, but he's highly effective. And maybe the thing, and this might be kind of part of why we haven't seen too much of that stretch floor component yet, is because Mitchell Saxon's been in foul trouble the last couple nights, so kind of have needed to push him a little bit more kind of to that interior to give them kind of like inside outside balance. I don't know, maybe that's kind of part of at least what we've seen in 2 games from Morauskas.
Yeah, and especially when you have Harry Wessels on the floor, Wessels can't go out too far, so the rest of the team has to kind of compensate defensively as well.
Yeah, and then Mikey Lewis has been another. I really liked him coming in, but he's really kind of fit in well and given them something, the St. Mary's squad, that they really haven't had, it feels like, in a while, coming off the bench.
Yeah, he kind of frustrated me in the first game because defensively he got beat at least 2 or 3 times, pretty easily. But then, his first shot is immediate catch and shoot, and he drains the 3. And that's, just that he had a smooth stroke and that quick fire mentality, and just the willingness to shoot from anywhere. It's a little bit Aiden Mahaney-esque, if you will. But Lewis, I mean, definitely when the Gales needed an offensive spark there in the second half against Chattanooga, he provided 14 points. 2 made threes. He can also create off the dribble too, which is encouraging. Guys, they started kind of closing down on him, and he did a couple pump fakes, drove in, was able to get to the hoop or pull up for a mid-range jumper. And I thought it was interesting. He leads a team with a 31% usage rate when he's on the floor. So he's a guy. He's in there for offense. And it's been a while since the Gales have had a sixth man who they can turn to offensively. I mean, a guy recently I was kind of thinking was Dan Fotu in his senior year, who would kind of come off the bench, give you a couple buckets. But I mean, that's a luxury to have, and he provides a very different skill set than Jordan Ross. And Ross has been solid. I like what he's provided, especially defensively. I think he might be the best on-ball defender. But I mean, to be able to bring Lewis off the bench and that 1-2 punch, I could see. I don't know if Lewis will quite surpass Ross just because Ross is so good defensively, but it's a good split, and Randy Bennett can really mix and match with those two.
Yeah, I suppose you have like a freshman, sophomore in there to kind of at least they give you different things at least right now. Yeah, if Lewis ends up starting to defend a little bit better, then you might start to see kind of that tide turn a bit. But I mean, to your point, I really like what Jordan Ross has done to this point as well. While he hasn't been I think he's shooting 41% through 2 games. We get small sample size, all that sort of stuff. But he's doing a lot of really good things, and almost to the point of the defense, maybe he's turned into actually a lot better defender than I think a lot of people were going to give him credit for coming into the year.
Oh, definitely. I mean, against Chattanooga, he helped limit that backcourt. I mean, maybe one of the best backcourts the Gales will face all year in Bonham and Huff, and limit them to, I think, 12, 13 points each, both below their lofty averages. And Ross, I mean, even the shots that they were making against him were tough shots. There was a couple times where Ross was on Bonham, and Bonham, pulls up and hits a shot, and I was like, no, that's great defense, and it's forcing them into those tough shots. And if they make them, they make them. But I mean, yeah, seeing Ross as that defensive stopper, and also, I mean, his ability to get to the rim is really important too, and put pressure on that defense. I think that the concern there still, can he be an outside shooter? Can he keep teams honest?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a team, we started looking at this squad. It's there weren't as many of those kind of spot up 3-point shooters or the kind of the reliable guys. You lose an Alex Dukas, you lose an Aiden Mahaney. Mm-hmm. Those are guys you really could rely upon to be those great 3-point shooters. You don't have them anymore. And where was that going to come from? So there is a little bit, obviously, that concern. Luke Barrett has kind of stepped in a little bit in that. Marshall Onis has been a little bit better on that front. But overall, I mean, this team, what we've seen, they're scoring maybe a lot more than we've seen over the last couple of years. The offense has really started to pick up, and maybe that's to the detriment a little bit of the defense, because the defense doesn't look like it's been all that great to this point. Is what we've seen on the defensive front a trend, or is this just a slow start against two very competent teams in Chattanooga and Towson?
Yeah, I remember they said something on the broadcast about how Randy Bennett was mentioning, this year's team is ahead of where they were last year in terms of offense, but not quite to where they were defensively. And I definitely see that out there. I mean, Chattanooga, they ran a really good offense. You got to give them a lot of credit. They hit threes. And then once those threes are falling, they're able to get those backdoor plays, get dribble drive going. And I think it's really important. Their ability to kind of play 5 out was huge. I don't know if that's something that the Gales kind of have trouble with. I mean, Mitchell Sachs and Harry Wessels aren't guys that can necessarily defend on the perimeter. So when you have an opposing 5 that can, hit mid-range, that can, even hit threes, and it puts a lot of pressure on the Gales. And I think it's a little bit it's a blip. I mean, so I think some of those backdoor plays are you don't see a lot of it happening against the Gales. You don't see them getting scored off of cuts and off ball action like that. And so a lot of just finding that defensive cohesion, making sure there's help defense. I mean, it can't just be one guy, chasing around that cutter the whole time. The whole team has to be aware. But I mean, I guess the one concern for me against Chattanooga, they allowed 19 assists, which, looking at last season's stats, their 3 highest assist totals. He had 19 assists to San Diego State, 19 to Gonzaga, and 17 to Xavier. All 3 of those games, the Gales lost. So one of Randy Bennett's defensive principles has been, make teams beat you with isolation ball. We're not going to let you play offense. If your best guy comes in and scores 30 points and hits tough mid ranges, contested threes, we'll take it. But I think the Gales, they have to find ways to make those teams more into isolation teams rather than teams that beat you with good basketball.
And obviously, this week they have Akron at home at University Credit Union Pavilion, and they hit the road for the first time and the neutral site against Nebraska up at the Pentagon in South Dakota. As you start to kind of like map out and think about this non-conference, obviously, like there's not like the big name whatnot, but it does feel like this, because this team is going to have some like growing to do on the defensive end, a little bit ahead of where they were offensively. Last year it did feel like it just took them time to figure out who their identity. Does it feel like they have maybe more of that identity kind of pat already, and we're just going to see a growth of the team we've seen the last two nights?
Yeah, I think last year it was tough because you lose Logan Johnson, who was kind of the ball handler, and that's bringing Goose back as that main ball handler, that's huge. Having a guy who can run the offense. I mean, they just weren't set in their roles last season, which is really tough. And then also, and Kyle Bowen as well, who is, kind of the heart of that defense along with Johnson. So, I mean, the guys that they're adding in this year are a little more role players. I mean, bringing back Saxon and Goose is huge, and having that, that 1-2 combo. So I think that provides, a steadier foundation. And, looking at the schedule last season, they got into it right away. I had Stanislaus State in that first game, and then it was, San Diego State, and then it was Xavier, and then had Utah and Boise State all there in close succession. This year, it's ramping up a little bit more. You get more of a warm up. Towson, Chattanooga, Akron, all solid teams. Nowhere near San Diego State or Xavier, those teams. So I mean, I think that the schedule has more of the ebbs and the flows this year, which will give the Gales a lot more time to kind of settle in.
Yeah, I mean, I really do like the way they set this up. You get over Thanksgiving, they'll get USC, then they get either, I think it's New Mexico or Arizona State. So then again, like another two potential matchups there. Arizona State, I feel like they're playing like half the WCC this year. So like we're gonna get like they're almost like the great comparison team for everybody else who isn't. Santa Clara has them tonight, and then Gonzaga has them on Sunday. So like you get a lot of like back and forth of what we're gonna see. Arizona State. If you want to know the comparison point before we get to conference play, watch Arizona State against any of the WCC teams.
Yeah,
there's your barometer. But thinking about like just taking a step back to where we are, there has been a lot of obviously like attention to realignment over the last how many ever months, years, whatnot, and the WCC has been impacted quite a bit over the last few months. We know that Washington State and Oregon State are in for the next 2 years, but now we know Gonzaga is going to be joining them in the Pac-12. We know Grand Canyon has announced that they're going to jump ship and head over to the Mountain West. So obviously like a lot of different moving pieces here. And I keep thinking about the scenario for St. Mary's, because they're the one who right now they're selling this WCC. There's no rumor, nothing. They're staying put as of right now. In a perfect world of like, what do you think is the best scenario for St. Mary's? Is it a Mountain West? Is it a Pac-12? Is it staying right in the WCC? And then what do you think it will end up being?
Man, I think that's a tough one. It's obviously in perfect world, you go back to how we were 5 years ago, and bring BYU back and everything, and keep Gonzaga. But man, I've been going back and forth and thinking about it. Well, you kind of have to see who can the WCC bring in. Can they bring? I mean, it's going to be tough for them to bring in any real top teams, but if they can kind of pick up the scraps from the Mountain West and the Pac-12, and like the solid teams that get caught in the fallout of all this, then maybe St. Mary's stays. But I see St. Mary's probably going to the Pac-12 as at least a basketball only member. I mean they've proven that they're one of the elite basketball programs in the West Coast, and the Pac-12 is the elite basketball conference. And I know if you're the Pac-12, if you want that elite stature, you got to bring in those good teams. I mean, they bring in like San Diego State, Colorado State, all the upper echelon of the Mountain West. And if they want to, maintain, I mean, having St. Mary's and Gonzaga in the same conference is huge. I mean, obviously, Randy Bennett built a special program, but you wonder if that would have happened without the success of Gonzaga and what Mark Few did to kind of raise the level in the West Coast Conference. So I mean, maybe even you see a multi-tiered system on the West Coast with the Mountain West, WCC, Pac-12, and maybe kind of a little bit of promotion relegation situation that really kind of encourages teams to do better. But I think Pac-12 is where St. Mary's has to shoot for, and you got to be a little bit selfish at this point. I mean, every other school there, it's everyone's thinking for themselves, and it's if you don't, it's maybe not the best for the health of the whole system overall. But if you don't do that, then you're getting left behind.
Yeah, and I think that is the unfortunate truth, is that really every institution is looking out for themselves, and it's survival mode at this point. Are you going to be able to survive the next few years, or whatever the future of college basketball ends up, or college sports in general ends up looking like, as it's all being driven mostly by football, but also then basketball as well. All right. Any last thoughts on, like, as far as like with St. Mary's, like going into these first couple games, like they look solid. They look like they're pointing in the right direction. What are you kind of looking forward to this week with Akron and Nebraska? What's something that maybe you're looking to see in those two games?
Yeah, I want to see a little more consistent 3-point shooting. I mean, obviously, their identity is not to just throw up a ton of 3-point shots, but to see one guy or two guys, hopefully, step forward as consistent shooters. I mean, we've the in the kind of 3-point, I guess, burden, if you will, has been spread a little bit. You have Marcellonis 4 for 10, Moravskas 2 of 8, Barrett 3 of 8, Lewis 3 of 10. Obviously, Moravskas step up and take more of an onus as a spot up shooter. But I've been really impressed with Luke Barrett. I mean, he was a guy last year who's a role player, and he's stepped in as that tertiary scorer. I think he's been my MVP so far, because he's continue with those intangibles. The offensive rebounding, the defense, the putbacks. I think he has 9 offensive rebounds in the year, which is really, really good. So I think the 3-point shooting, if he can become a consistent 3-point shooter, that's huge. And then just the defense, if the Gales can find more cohesion, kind of force teams to become contested 3-point shooters. Saxon, if he can stay out of foul trouble. I think it's just the little things. I like where they're at so far. I think there's, obviously, big game against Nebraska coming up, but I think Akron can help prepare them for that.
All right. Great stuff. Thanks, Liam, for hopping on. You college basketball writer, covers St. Mary's. You can follow him on Twitter at lhanley_34. Great follow. Follow him along. And then, thanks for hopping on. Thanks for talking some St. Mary's hoops, and we'll definitely catch up down the road.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
All right. Want to thank Liam one more time for hopping on and talking some Gales basketball. St. Mary's isn't going to have a huge test, I don't think, for another few weeks. Nebraska obviously is at least a solid test from a big one of the power conferences. But we're not going to see them, I think, really get challenged until we get to the Thanksgiving weekend, where they will play USC. And they're going to play a team, again, the Trojans, who have played at least one familiar opponent. Even in exhibition status, they played Gonzaga in that one and beat Gonzaga, and don't read too much into an exhibition against them. But that does lead to kind of talking about where the Zags are right now. And they opened the season with maybe the biggest splash you possibly could make, with that win over, at the time, number 8 Baylor, winning 101-63 at Spokane Arena. Obviously, it was the huge talk early on in the week about how the Zags just completely picked apart Baylor, kind of neutralized their athleticism, and did every little thing right and kept the pressure up. The Zags looked the aggressor all night long. Their depth was a huge component to that. The continuity that they had was a big factor in how they were able to hit the ground running. They were plus 13 in the rebounding column. Dusty Stromer was great in that game. Braden Huff was incredible off the bench. They got 40 points off the bench in that game. Huff with 14, Stromer 11. And then just the instant offense, the microwave that Khalif Battle has, that he is, as we knew he was going to be. 12 points in that one, 4 for 8 from 3. He got on that heater in that second half, where he hit 3 straight threes in a matter of 90 seconds, 70 seconds, something like that. It was so fast, and anything that you could have resembled as a close game disappeared once he went on that run. He's one of the more unstoppable guys in the league when he starts to click. And it talked all about like the offense, but in that game, it really was the defense that was the star for Gonzaga. They were swarming, double teaming VJ Edgecombe, making it difficult for him, and gave him very little space, which was kind of actually what I was thinking you had to do against a guy like him. They rebounded well. The thing about that block from Caleb Battle coming across the lane and getting Edgecombe as he was driving to the basket. This Gonzaga squad held Baylor to 37% from the field. They were 3 for 21 from 3. And again, like I talked a lot about how that focus on Edgecombe was going to be a big part of that. And he was 2 for 11, 4 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 of those were on the massive dunk on Joe Few in garbage time, which honestly, like, that's one of like, dude, just get out the way. He's obviously like Joe's going to end up on posters forever. But the dunk meant nothing. And I do agree with a lot of the commentary online about how SportsCenter so focused on the dunk rather than, the result of the game where Baylor lost by 38 points. And it's a great highlight, whatever else, but dunk in garbage time that meant absolutely nothing, didn't change anything momentum-wise, did nothing to... It's 2 points. That's all it was. And it's an entertaining 2 points, but that's all. But in a game like that, in a scenario in which it happened, like, whatever. Impressive dunk, but doesn't mean much of anything else. And the defense was there just all night long. And that was the thing that stood out. But then also the connectivity that this team had, that continuity component. Gonzaga had 25 assists. Baylor had 23 made field goals in this game. And the stat that's been floating around, one of the stats, the many stats floating around after that game, that Gonzaga's 38-point win over Baylor is the largest by any team in a season opener against a top 10 opponent in AP poll history. So another feather in the cap for the Zags on that one. But then they had a very different game on Sunday against Arizona State. A really gritty game. This was a team, the Arizona State squad, that had just beaten Santa Clara just 2 nights before. This was an Arizona State team that looks very different from the one we saw a year ago. Very athletic, a lot of really nice pieces on that Arizona State squad. And it was bothersome to Gonzaga early on. A lot more bothersome than what Baylor's was. Now, Baylor, it was like one athletic guy and a bunch of smaller guards. Arizona State is a big, long team. And that was something that was a little bit more challenging. Arizona State stayed in this thing throughout. It was a tie game at the half. But Gonzaga's depth showed its face again in this one. And it was, one, the veteran leadership. Ryan Nembhard was great down the stretch, was able to find his spots, able to run that offense well enough that it actually gave Gonzaga better opportunities in tight windows. Caleb Battle, again, was one of the stars in this one, as he also had his massive dunk, which actually, again, maybe to the point of that Arizona State got that back immediately after that, but a highlight dunk that is going to be remembered, I think, for quite a while, just because of the way it was all set up and everything else. Michael Ajayi has been so good for this Gonzaga squad in the first couple games, coming off the bench, playing a role. He's been their best rebounder. He's been averaging 10 rebounds a game off the bench. He's giving them enough on the offensive side because he doesn't. The thing is, right now, he doesn't need to be the guy who's going to score 20 points a game. He doesn't need to be the guy who's even scoring 10 points a game. But what they need is someone who's going to clean up the glass and be that willing rebounder, and that's exactly what he's been early on. Ryan Nembhard, again, like I mentioned again, I won the number I wanted to remember to say is that first 2 games, he's averaging 11 assists. He's doing what you want your point guard to do. He's distributing to the guys. He's running this offense for a team that, again, has so many weapons that, like, he doesn't need to score 14, 15 a game. Like, right now, he's averaging 9.5 a game, but 11 assists. And he's getting his teammates involved. He's putting them in good spots. And maybe the most impressive thing to me over these first couple of games, based on just like the different looks that Baylor and Arizona State give you, has been the continued development of Braden Huff. Mentioned about how well he played in that first game, getting 14 points off the bench against Baylor. Well, he was even better against Arizona State. Now he's averaging 17.5 a game, which is a team high off the bench. And this is large part of that is because Graham Ike has had some early struggles. He's been in some foul trouble, not a ton of foul trouble. But Braden Huff is almost become automatic on offense. Like, he has been so good around the basket. His touch has been great. He's not rushed. He is starting to grow into what is going to look like one of the better players in the country. Obviously not right now, but give it another year or so, and Braden Huff, I think, is going to be in those conversations, those same conversations that Graham Ike is in today. And it's the depth. Does Gonzaga win this? Because I don't know if Gonzaga wins that game, and I actually don't think they would have won this Arizona State game a year ago. They needed a Michael Ajayi. They needed a Braden Huff. They needed a Caleb Battle. They needed those guys. And now, rounded out, like, Gonzaga played fairly well all the way around. You had moments from Nolan Hickman. You had moments from Graham Ike. You had moments from Dusty Stromer. It's not like that they were uninvolved in this contest. It's that they're involved in different ways in these games. And I think that's the thing. There's a little bit of a fluidity to the roles that a lot of these guys are going to play. And from that core group who returned from a year ago, Ike, Nembhard, Hickman, and Greg, there has been this sense of it's the unfinished business, that they're going to do whatever they have to win games and to really kind of get them to that next level that they're hoping to get to, which obviously is getting back to getting deeper into the tournament and potentially winning a national championship. But this squad is doing all the little things right. They're playing with an intensity. They're playing with purpose. They're looking really good through these first couple of games. This coming week, it's not quite the same heavyweight that they're going to face. UMass Lowell comes in, but that's not a bad team. That's a good team that's going to push Gonzaga. That game comes on. That is on Friday. So Gonzaga does get a solid opponent coming up, but not quite to the level of these two, but still someone who's going to be one of the better mid-majors in the country. So I'm going to switch over to Santa Clara because this is another team that got a big win on opening night, got the first big win, I feel, of the college basketball season when they beat St. Louis 85-78. They looked really good throughout. This is potentially a quad one victory on a neutral site. The offense was humming. And that's not something that should be surprising about a Santa Clara squad with the roster that they have. Adama Ball was really good in that one. Again, being kind of, you could very clearly tell he was the best guy on the floor. I thought what was important for Santa Clara was seeing the depth play out almost immediately. Cameron Tongue was great in that first half, as 16 points in the first half, 18 points for the game, 7 rebounds. Really gave them something that they were missing in that first half. There was a grittiness, a toughness that they needed. He did really well on Robbie Avila. I thought there were a couple of times where he just kind of took it right at one of the guys who was seen as one of the best players in the country. Now, unfortunately, Avila did end up having to leave that game with a leg injury in the second half. So, but that doesn't really tarnish what this game was in any way because of when it happened. Santa Clara played well throughout. It wasn't like that a light switch flipped once he left the game. No, they were playing well with or without him on the floor. That said, Santa Clara was able to take advantage, and Christoph Tilley just went off in that second half. He had 17 and 8 in that one. Elijah Mahai, adding to that depth off the bench, he had 10 points in 15 minutes. And I think some of the things to look at is like offense was humming, but the defense could have been better. I think their length is still going to be one of their best assets. They're one of the bigger teams in college basketball. When you're able to throw 6'7", 6'7" at your 2 and 3 and with length, that's a big deal. Especially when you then also do have 6'10" and 7 foot down low on that front court. And even Carlos Stewart at the point, while he's not the tallest guy, dude is built like a tank. And that's going to give you a different wrinkle to that defensive unit. But there were moments where I felt like they got beat to the basket a little too easily. Rim protection might also be one of the considerations as well. But it was a good, solid first showing. And later in the week, they had a big week. They also had to play Arizona State. I mentioned earlier that they lost to Arizona State, or Arizona State had beaten Santa Clara already. And that one was also a little bit of a game of runs. Arizona State kind of controlled the game for the most part this contest. And there were definitely moments here and there where it felt like that this Santa Clara squad was just kind of maybe a step behind, or they weren't executing nearly as well as they could. They only shot 40% from the field. They were a -5 on the rebounding front. Physicality was a bit of an issue. And this was something that Coach Sendek talked about after the game, and I'm actually going to pull up some sound from him, and so that you can kind of take my word for it, but listen to what Coach had to say as they were going through the post-game press conference.
To the physicality that they came out of the gates with. I thought we had a number of opportunities where we had the kind of shots we worked to get, whether they were threes or at the rim or even some free throws. And we didn't convert. That didn't give us much margin on the other end of the floor. Did a good job handling the pressure from the standpoint we only had 7 turnovers. Defensively, a couple second shot threes really hurt us. They were at the free throw line more frequently than we were. But, I think if anything, it just encourages us to stick with the process. The result wasn't what we wanted, but the way we played, was very consistent with things we've been practicing. We just need to convert on some possessions and, see what there is to clean up tomorrow.
So Santa Clara didn't come out on top in that one, but as I think we saw on Sunday, that this Arizona State team might actually be pretty good. And while on the surface, Arizona State seems like a lower tier Big 12 team, even was like a lower tier Pac-12 team a year ago, this isn't the same Arizona State team. And the way Santa Clara competed against the Sun Devils, I think does say a lot to still their potential. They lost 7 to Arizona State, and Arizona State lost to Gonzaga by only a few points. So when you start to look at like the difference even between those squads or whatnot, I'm not saying that like Gonzaga and Santa Clara are only like this many points apart from each other. But when you look at like similar opponents, whatnot, Gonzaga held their own, or sorry, Santa Clara held their own against an Arizona State team, which was able to push Gonzaga at the kennel. And still some other good things came out of that. Elijah Mahai, talked about him. He had 19 against Arizona State. Carlos Stewart had 17 in that game. Good to see him kind of get out that funk. He went scoreless in the first game, but I kind of figured it was going to take some time for him to get back into that and play a little bit of a different role for them in that contest. Santa Clara will be fine. Like Santa Clara got one of the big wins this week. They played well enough against an Arizona State team that both of these games I think are going to trend well for Santa Clara. Arizona State's not going to look like a bad loss, and it's not a bad loss at a neutral site and whatnot. It's not going to look anything poor for the Broncos. And that St. Louis win, I think, is just going to age better and better and better as the season goes on, because that St. Louis squad is going to be good. You could tell just by the game against Santa Clara that there's potential there. They just hadn't figured everything out quite yet, as they're dealing with also a lot of transition, new coach, new players, new system, all those sorts of things, but a lot of talent on that squad. And that brings me to two teams that were a little bit who did better than I expected going into the season, or at least like early on. And I'll start with Oregon State. They start off 2-0. Big wins against Utah Tech. They won 80-57 against Tech in that opener. Then they had Weber State a couple nights later and won 76-48. They have been +7 in the rebounding column in each game. They're averaging 10 turnovers a game, so being very efficient and taking care of the basketball pretty well in these first two contests. They've allowed their opponents to shoot 33% from the field. Michael Ratai, 15 points, 10 rebounds a game. DeMarco Minor, 13, 5 and 5. Very similar to, I think, what was kind of expected as he transferred over from SIUE. And this is an Oregon State team that is at least like starting to look the part more of a team that could actually be in the mix in the middle there in the WCC. Again, not the opponents are not impressive, but the way that they were able to handle their business and dominate in those two games is the impressive part. Those games were really kind of well in hand pretty early on in both scenarios. The Oregon State, the Beavers are going to be a problem. They're not going to be as much the easy out as maybe we initially thought. And this is just going to be a fun team to watch as we go forward. Now they have their first big challenge doesn't, I think, come for another couple of weeks when they actually do take on Oregon, and that's going to be on, let's see, I just had written it down when they play Oregon. That game's going to be actually in a few weeks. All right, on the 21st, Thursday the 21st, Oregon at Oregon State. So the renewed rivalry from the old Pac-12. That's, I think, going to be their first big challenge in this non-conference schedule. But plenty of time to kind of still, again, work out some of the kinks, work out some of the bugs before they get to that contest. And the other one is Washington State. Washington State opened with Portland State. They won 100-92, which, again, the eye-popping numbers, obviously the 100, but I kept looking, I'm like, well, they allowed 92 to Portland State. So that in and itself is actually was less than impressive to me. But 100 is, no matter what, is impressive, because that's still, you have to put up good shots and play at a pace to be able to get up to that. So that was one part of it. But the defense was a little shaky. But then they got Bradley. And Bradley is one of the better mid-majors, will be one of the better mid-major teams in the country. And they handled them from the get-go. They ended up winning 91-74. That was maybe that was by far the more impressive game to me of those two. They still were able to put up 90 plus points in that game, and they're getting to the line a ton in these first two contests. 65 free throw attempts in 2 games. They're shooting 48% from the field. They're shooting 39% from 3. The Eastern Washington 4, led by Cedric Coward, have made up 63% of Washington State's total points at this stage. Coward has been leading the way, 20 and a half points per game, 9.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. He's shooting 61% from the field. This is Washington State has really kind of taken what David Riley and company did at Eastern and just hit the ground running and have not missed a beat to this point in the first 2 games. It's looking really good for both of the Pac-12 schools, Oregon State, Washington State, as they enter into the second week of the season. And for Washington State, there is another big opportunity on the calendar this week, as they'll play Iowa on a neutral. They'll be on the Big Ten Network on Friday. So maybe it's the first large test for this Washington State squad, but a very impressive outing against Bradley, which should have a lot of people pretty excited that maybe there won't be as near the drop off from a year ago as we may have thought there was going to be. All right. So I'll do it for this episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'll have another episode. I'll talk about the games of the week and preview those later on. And we'll also be able to go over a little bit more of where Gonzaga is in that one. Theo Lawson from the Spokesman Review will hop on for that episode, and we'll go more in depth with the Zags on that. All right. So be sure to follow along and hit the subscribe button on social media, on YouTube, Spotify, all the things. Do follow along where you are, and that'll do it. Have a great Monday, everybody. Happy Veterans Day, and I will catch you later.